The Echelon Radio Network presents the Tax Matters Radio Podcast, a conversation about money for everyone, with your host, Gary Weiss.
Welcome to the Echelon Tax Matters Specialty Group Podcast. I'm your host, Gary Weiss, CPA. This podcast is designed to cover a wide range of topics. It is not a podcast designed just for tax professionals. It's a podcast designed for those impacted by the complex, lengthy, and confusing tax laws. Taxes of all kinds are part of our everyday life, and this podcast is a way to bring you relevant, easy to understand, and very reliable topics to help you make informed decisions when you begin the journey through the mystic labyrinth of rules, regulations. Future topics will include labor law, sales tax, employment law, and all sorts of cool stuff. Just in case you really want to know, I am a licensed CPA in California since 1996, and I practice in Woodland Hills with my partner, Quentin Staples. I specialize in tax resolution services, hence my tagline, I fight the fascist state of California and the evil empire known as the IRS. So, let's get right down to the Kyber rifles here and get started. Our guest today is Abby Higginson. She's a specialist. She'll tell you what she does. So, with no further ado, Abby, introduce yourself and let us know what you do.
Hi, Gary. My name is Abby Higginson. I am president and CEO of VH Works, Inc., and we are a bookkeeping company. We specialize in small to medium-sized businesses, primarily sole proprietorships.
Okay, great. Don't worry. Okay, so let's start out with a little bit of background. Mm-hmm. You weren't born a bookkeeper, I assume.
No.
So you sort of became one over time. So how did you get there? A little bit your education, and what got you to that place?
I was actually an English major way back when, and I spent my formative years working in magazine publishing. Through changes in the publishing industry, I kind of fell out of it and was looking for another career path. And I was helping out a friend with her books, and I thought, this is pretty interesting. And there's actually a lot of similarity between working on books with numbers and books with words. So I took an interest in it. I got a part-time job with another bookkeeping company and picked up a little bit more. And then I started taking classes, and then I started taking more classes, and then I started going out on my own and getting clients. And then I got more clients, and then I took more classes. And I actually ended up just a few years ago finishing UCLA certification for accounting, and I actually sat for one of the CPA exams, and I did fail by 1 point. But at that point, the pandemic hit, and my bookkeeping clients actually needed a lot more of my time because things started getting very complicated, especially with them wanting to apply for PPP loans and additional bookkeeping services needed. And at that point, I realized, you know what? This is what I really want to do. I really want to work more closely with clients. I don't want to sit in an office and do taxes once a year. That's not my thing. I enjoy the relationship. I enjoy seeing how their businesses are going. I enjoy talking to them and discussing their problems and their issues and helping them.
Yeah, that sounds great. So let me ask this. So as a bookkeeper, a lot of people perceive, the bookkeeper as the person who sits in the back, which was once a storage room, has been converted, and you don't ever talk to anybody. But that's not realistic. The bookkeeper plays an integral part in most businesses. So when you do that, how do you interact with the client, and what do you tell them initially? Say, hey, why? And they ask you, I don't need a bookkeeper. I've got, I'm doing it on an Excel. Or I'm doing it, I'm doing it in some form of bookkeeping, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm good with it. So what is that value that you bring to them?
I bring a knowledge of QuickBooks and a good working knowledge of accounting and a little more specialty information that they may not have. Some actually, a lot of my clients started off doing their own books, and it just got to be overwhelming. Or they had a question, they ran into a problem, they asked me for help, and then they realized, wow, you know what, I don't really need to do this all the time. I think I'm just going to hire someone to do this for me. But there are still people who enjoy doing their own books, and that's fine. We also service as, once in a while they'll run into a problem, they'll have a question, they reach out, and we're able to help them. Because a lot of times their CPA does not have a knowledge of QuickBooks. They can say, oh, debit this and credit that, and well, how does that translate into a QuickBooks entry? And they have no idea. And so we help on a lot of different levels.
So in the financial preparation to ultimately leading to a tax return, we have the owner, the bookkeeper, and the CPA. Mm-hmm. So what's the difference between what you do for the client, other than prepare the tax return? Everybody understands that. But as a bookkeeper, what is the value you bring that the CPA does not?
I see it as a relationship. For example, say you're in the hospital for surgery. You're there for a couple of days. You have an extensive surgery. The surgeon pops in to do the surgery maybe once or twice during your stay, but the nurses are there all the time. They check your vitals. They make sure you're okay. They change your bandages. And that is sort of the relationship that I have with my clients. We're there all the time. We're looking at their books. We see their daily transactions. We see their receipts. We see their purchases. We can flag possible fraud. And we also work closely with their CPA. And that's the CPA who pops in maybe once a year, does the taxes, answers a question here or there, does some planning, and then runs off again. But we're the ones who have the daily relationship with the client, and we also have the relationship with the CPA.
Right. That's what I want to talk about. So talk about your relationship with the CPA and the value that what you give the CPA that ultimately benefits the client.
Well, we can give the CPA a clean set of books. Everything is properly categorized. If the CPA has a certain way of doing things, and actually all CPAs are slightly different, the CPA may say, we want to try to work on this expense.
It's okay. Keep going. The CPA. Okay, so let me help you so that everyone understands. As a CPA, when I'm going to do a tax return, and what I do is I normally call the bookkeeper and say, please send me the books. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times all I'll say is, please send me the P&L and the balance sheet. That's the profit and loss statement for those who don't know what that means. And that's what I'm going to prepare the tax return. So if I see categories like miscellaneous, ask your accountant, undeposited funds, CPAs go, uh-oh, this is a bad set of books. There's things missing, and then they have to get involved. And all of a sudden, the cost to prepare that tax return goes way up. Mm-hmm. So you become if you do it, a competent bookkeeper will help keep that cost down. So your relationship with the CPA is just as important as it is with your client, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of times, many CPA offices just don't have the bandwidth to deal with that kind of mess cleanup, especially if it's tax season and they're stretched to the limits. They need, because I've worked on that end too. I've worked with CPAs, and you get a set of books, and it's like, oh my God, this is going to take hours and hours and hours of cleanup, and we just don't have time. So we just put them on the extension and push them off to a later date. But still, it's a lot of work to pull those together, and that's definitely an aspect that we help with. We can also help in a client who is not sure about something, like I bought a computer. I don't know. Is it an asset? Is it an expense? Do I want to depreciate it? Do I want to write it off this year? And in some cases, we can help with that, or we'll reach out to the CPA and see how they would like to handle the purchase. Mm.
Okay, so one of the things you mentioned earlier was something called QuickBooks, the evil program that everybody has to use, but everybody hates. So explain to us, there are two versions of QuickBooks. There's a desktop version, and there's a version called QuickBooks Online, which is becoming more and more popular. what's the difference and which one do you like and why?
I'm a traditionalist. I prefer QuickBooks Desktop. It's what I learned on. I feel it's more robust. It's more accounting friendly. QuickBooks Online seems to have been designed more for the layperson, which in some ways makes it more difficult to work with. So you have to have a thorough understanding of the back end of it. It's really, really easy to get yourself into trouble with QuickBooks, and that's where we come in to do a lot of cleanup, because it's a double entry bookkeeping, but you don't always see the other entry. You're just clicking and you don't know where it goes, but hey, it's gone somewhere, so it's all good. But then when you pull financials, then you, as you said, Gary, there's stuff all over the place. There's miscellaneous. There's ask my accountant. There's here, this, that, and the other. It's like, well, I don't know. I don't remember putting it there. Well, no, you don't. QuickBooks did it automatically for you, but you didn't understand it.
So so you know that misusing QuickBooks or not understanding can lead to problems. So do you have some stories of where, people have used QuickBooks and it's gotten them into trouble or caused them problems with their accountant, which led to a tax return that had to be prepared and amended or audited, that type of thing?
Oh, absolutely. I had a client who went from desktop to online, and he set up bank feeds, which the transactions from the bank and credit cards automatically feed into QuickBooks Online. You go through and it lists all the transactions, and you can categorize them right there and click accept, reject, modify, whatever. But what he did not realize was that QuickBooks makes suggestions of what they think it might be. Actually, what it thinks it might be. And he just thought, oh, that's great, accept. And he clicked on everything. And then when he pulled the financials, I was just like, oh my God, what did you do? And he's like, oh, this is a great program. I did all this. It was so easy. They're absolutely right. Anyone can do it. Like, no. So I had to unwind everything almost and recategorize it. So tip for anyone, don't just click accept. Look at it thoroughly. It's so easy to get into trouble, and you can spend hours of time trying to unwind those transactions.
Yeah, as a CPA, one of the things I find when I work with bookkeepers, there's certain accounts that you look to see that are real easy to look at and see if they're correct. Like, I'll look at rent expense. And if there are more than 12 entries in rent expense, I have an issue. There's one rent, you pay rent each month. There should be 12 entries. I open it up and there's 40 entries because they flushed other things through there or they do that. And that's what causes accountants, CPAs, to go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, because when they get that financial, they want to sit down, do the tax return, they open it up, they print out the P&L, and none of it makes sense. And for those who don't understand, the P&L and the balance sheet are parts of a set of financial statements. And the balance sheet just holds your assets and liabilities, and the profit and loss is exactly what that is. And that bottom line, that one number, net profit, flows to the balance sheet. So these two have to work in harmony. So a lot of times you're all working from the P&L and nobody looks at the balance sheet. Mm-hmm. Then the accountant opens it up and just looks at the balance sheet, and there's negative cash, there's negative accounts payable, there's negative receivables. Nothing makes sense, which means is something else is wrong someplace. Mm-hmm. So then we go back to the bookkeeper like you and say, what's going on, and what do you do with that when we do that?
Well, in QuickBooks, when you pull up the financials, you can click on any of those lines and it'll pull up the detail. And that's where I'll start. I'll click on that and I'll look through the detail, and usually a quick perusal will see exactly where you went wrong. And if it's individuals, I'll fix them from that end. If it's a group of things, you can go in the accountants tab and do a group select and edit that from that end of it. But that's where I would start.
Okay. No, that's a good point, because again, when we're preparing a tax return, we have limited time, right? And when we see that balance sheet's way out of whack, we know something's wrong someplace else. So that's what we look forward to you, and we don't want to deal with the client. We want to deal with the bookkeeper, because the bookkeeper understands if I say, hey, this account has a negative balance, what does it mean? You understand that. If I say that to the client, I might as well be speaking Greek. So that's real important. So let's just change the direction at a moment. So you've worked with a lot of clients over the years. Can you tell us, without mentioning the client specifically, some interesting clients that you've worked with in the different types of industries?
I've worked with musicians in the music industry. I've worked with people in the entertainment industry. And these are all sole proprietors. They're individuals who contract. I've worked with much larger companies. I wouldn't say huge companies, but large enough that definitely a challenge with home services. I've worked with people in custom publishing. I've worked with actually a couple of custom publishing people. But yeah, mostly sole proprietors and they have their own business.
What are the challenges you find with musicians, for example? What makes them different than somebody in a different industry? What do you find? Because musicians, if you're in Southern California, every accountant has a musician as a client. I guarantee we've got about 10 of them, 12 of them, I don't know. But everybody has one. So what are the challenges you find that are unique to musicians?
Egos and receipts.
Yeah, this we all understand. Yeah. And odd receipts from strange places.
Yeah, they're really bad at keeping receipts. They travel a lot. Sometimes they're hard to get a hold of. Actually, this applies pretty much to a lot of sole proprietorships where they mix personal and business finances together. And it takes a lot of backtracking. Was this a personal expense? Was this a business expense? I see you went to Las Vegas. Was this for business or did you go to have fun? And it's a lot of work to track them down and get them to sit long enough to answer those questions. But again, that's not specific to musicians. They just tend to travel more than
Right.
regular people.
But as a CPA, that's what we want from you as the bookkeeper. We want you to do that. We want you to spend the time at that level of minutia, so we don't. So otherwise, a $5,000 tax return will become $10,000 tax return. So that's one of the reasons we rely upon bookkeepers. So, but each bookkeeper has challenges, in different industries. Musicians, definitely. They don't keep receipts for anything, but either do contractors. Do you do contracting?
I have not. Independent contractors, not building. I'm assuming you mean building contractors?
Yeah, that's right. Those are people also that, for some reason, they keep receipts, but they're in a box someplace in the back room and they don't record anything. So let's start with that. So you get a new client. You onboard a new client, you go into his office, and he hands you the proverbial shoebox worth of receipts. What do you say? How do you start? Where do you begin with a new client? Tell us how you onboard a new client.
Well, first I take a look at what kind of bookkeeping they've been doing. And I say QuickBooks because that's my specialty, but there are other bookkeeping softwares out there. But most people use QuickBooks. And I'll start off by taking a look at those books and looking at the financials for the past 2-3 years and see where they're at. I like to see what categories they're using, what accounts they're using, the level of transactions that they have per month, how many bank accounts, savings accounts, credit cards. Are they using anything for personal expenses? Are they mixing? If they have different companies, because some of my clients actually have a couple of different things that they're tracking for taxes. Like, for example, one was a musician, but he also had an Airbnb. And he also was taking care of an elderly parent. So he was keeping, per his CPA, receipts for different categories. So I was booking the expenses just for the Airbnb and the receipts for the Airbnb, and collecting expenses that he would spend on his elderly parent. Also booking the income and receipts for his day job.
So you're basically organizing his life on paper.
Exactly.
That's real important. So, and when you onboard clients, or you've had clients for a while, what do you find are your biggest challenges with the clients?
The biggest challenge, and this is probably what most people have, is communication. I wouldn't say it's a problem. I do have very good relationships with my clients, but they get busy, I get busy, and sometimes I'll reach out to them, and some prefer text, some prefer email. I will email or call with question, and they'll take a couple of days to get back to me. Well, by then I'll have more questions. So timeliness is always a factor. If I say, hey, I'm seeing some expenses pop up on your credit card in Cancun. Are you in Cancun, or is this fraud? I don't want to wait 3 days for him to get back to me and say, oh, yeah, I took a vacation with my spouse. That would be a problem, and that does happen because they're busy. I understand that. But things are very timely.
I have a client that they travel, him and his wife, and all of a sudden I get a call from the credit card company wanting to confirm, were you in New York on this day? And that's transaction one. Then were you in, another state the next day? And, to them it doesn't make sense, but to a musician who's moving around, that makes a lot of sense. That's one of the big advantages of having a bookkeeper, which in some ways is not just bookkeeping. You're doing business management services.
Yeah.
You're helping them to, navigate. You're freeing them, essentially. You're freeing them away from having to do the paperwork and stuff that they're not really core competency at, and gives you to do that. That's your core competency. So as you do that, as clients, tell you stuff, we all know clients may not always be truthful in what they tell you. What have you found as a way of sort of filtering through that?
Oh, wow. After I've spent a few years working with a client, I kind of know. I have a good idea of what they're doing and what they're not doing. If they're, they just bought a new computer and now they're all of a sudden they're buying 2 more computers. I'm like, are you sure this isn't for your kid? Is this really for your business? But a lot of times I'll understand the nature of the business. I'll understand, like, okay, he does need 3 monitors and 3 separate computers. Or I'll know, I don't think so. Yeah. And in which case I'll talk to him and ask again. And then I'll have it on email. Whereas, like, if the CPA comes back and says, is this real expense legit? And I'm like, yeah, I have it. I'll forward the email and say, look, this is what he says. This is what he claims. I'm not his mom.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I know as a CPA, one of the things I always encourage clients who have bookkeepers, and I always encourage clients to have bookkeepers, because I tell them the money that you save, the time and money that you would save doing things, not doing things yourself, you'll be out there and you can make that money someplace else, and you'll pay the bookkeeper far less time. I have one client who's an electrician who wants to do his own books. So he's out 12 hours, 14 hours a day. He says, well, I'll come home and I'll do it at night. I go, no, you won't. That's not going to happen. You're not going to come home after a 14-hour day and sit down and start putting stuff in QuickBooks or Excel. So I said there's value in having a bookkeeper. But one of the most important things I find is the relationship I have with the bookkeeper. I always encourage the bookkeeper to call the accountant. If you don't exclude them. Don't wait for the accountant to show up once a year, like you said, pop in, do the tax return. It doesn't make sense. So when you work with accountants, how do you find that relationship?
I have a pretty good relationship with most of my clients' accountants. There's only one that I never was able to get a hold of and completely wanted nothing to do with me. The rest I have very good working relationships with. And I do speak with them throughout the year, and they'll contact me because a lot of times they can't get a hold of their client. They'll reach out to me and say, hey, I'm still waiting for their personal taxes. And even if I don't do their personal taxes or work with their personal expenses, I'll be the liaison between the two and help with that. I'll reach out a lot of times if the client's made a large purchase or a lease. to the CPA and ask how they would like that handled, if they want a new account set up, if they want to put it under an old account. Of course, we work closely with, year-end journal entries. Any other questions CPAs have, they'll come to me first before they'll go to the client.
That's the big advantage. It's easier for CPAs to talk to somebody who understands the books than talk with the client and say, you're putting things in this account, and they're going to go, what account? What are you talking about? So it's all good. So this time of year, which is right now, it's December, and we're doing a lot of tax projections and tax planning for year-end payroll and those type of things. This is where having a bookkeeper is real important, right? So for tax projections, tell us how you do that for the client.
With tax projections, I'll pull the financials year to date and just make sure they're clean, which I do pretty much quarterly anyway. So there's not too much going on that needs to be fixed at that point. And then I'll project out income and expenses through the rest of the year. At that point, the CPA will talk to the client about what they're looking at. And I have one client right now who's in that position right now as a CPA. And of course, there's still fluctuation because he's going to use that number to decide whether or not to give his employees year-end bonuses, and if so, how much. I have another client who's a pretty large client, but she's on a fiscal year. So
wait, hold on. You just lost everybody. What the hell's a fiscal year? Is that like a Bud Light year or a light year or something like that? What's a fiscal year? So real quickly, just we got to stay away from those technical terms, and so nobody's going to understand that. So explain what a fiscal year is.
Well, most people understand a tax year to end on a calendar year, whereas that it ends on December 31st of any given year. But other companies and governments, for example, they work off of a fiscal year, which means their tax year ends on another date other than December 31st. In this case, my client's fiscal year end is on September 30th, so it's a third quarter year end. So we already did her financials, so she's good to go. But there's still other reporting that she'll need to do. For example, 1099s are still based on a calendar year.
Let's talk about that. That's a good one, because this time of year, people are thinking year end, I'm going to pay people. I have a client that one of his favorite things to do is he cuts all his vendors. He cuts the check on December 31st, waits till 4:30, runs to the post office and puts them in the mail at 5 o'clock on December 31st. So they don't get them till the next year. That always creates a problem. But 1099s are very important. The IRS and the Franchise Tax Board are starting to really crack down on these. So can you explain who gets a 1099, what is a 1099, and how they're prepared?
1099s are for independent contractors. If you're a small business and you subcontract some work out to somebody else, or you have a consultant, a lawyer especially, even though they're corporations, they still need 1099s. But again, these are smaller people. We're not talking about, you're not going to send a 1099 to Walmart, for example. And these are small, privately owned people.
Yeah, basically, if you have a Social Security number and you did work for somebody, you're going to get a 1099.
Right.
Because if you don't, from an audit perspective, which I do those, from an audit perspective, if an IRS auditor looks at your books and sees a whole bunch of names and say, what are these? These are for services. And you show them a receipt and they go, great. Where's the 1099? Because if it's greater than $600,
right,
you have to issue the 1099. So that's real important that the bookkeepers also understand those 1099s must be issued. Otherwise, potentially under an audit, the IRS could disallow the expense. Even though you have the receipt and everything, it can be disallowed. So we know those have to be prepared. What about payroll? Do you do payroll, and how do you deal with payroll like ADP, paychecks, and that type of thing?
I do payroll for a few clients, including my own company, of course. And I work with paychecks. I work with Heartland Payroll. I work with QuickBooks Payroll. I have done ADP, but I don't particularly like them. All the systems are very different, but if you are going to use a payroll company, or even if you do your own payroll, definitely go through a company. There are some companies who will guarantee their filing, their quarterly filings, their annual filings, their pay their payroll taxes. And that's what you want. You don't want to go with some cheap fly-by-night company who says that they're paying off your taxes and they're actually not, because you will be held liable for it with fees and penalties on top of it. But yes, I do work with many different payroll companies.
Good, yeah, because a lot of times this time of year we're doing that bonus check for the owner at the year end, and that needs to be done correctly. So we rely upon the bookkeeper to communicate with the payroll company, because trying to get the owner to communicate with the payroll company is not always successful. So it's real important that we do that. So in the closing moments here, yes, we have to finally stop. I know you're all thrilled that we're having this wonderful conversation, but we're going to have to bring it to an end. Closing thoughts, recommendations, advice you can give to potential business owners or people who don't use bookkeepers.
For people who don't use bookkeepers, if you're using QuickBooks, I would say be very mindful of the entries that you make. Think carefully before you accept any transaction if you're using feeds. If you're in doubt, Google it. Intuit has pretty robust answer forums for most questions. There are bookkeeping firms such as mine that if you need setup help, some advice, reach out. We can charge an hourly fee, get you back on the right track, answer questions when you have it, but then let you run along with it.
Great. Do you have a website?
I do. It's www.vhworksinc.com.
Spell that out so people can hear it.
VHWORKSINC.com.
Excellent. So that's how they reach you if they have any questions. All the information about you is on your website?
Yep.
Excellent. All right. So, Abby, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.
This is very informative. I hope somebody got something out of it and they understand that bookkeepers play a very pivotal role in getting your books and everything done. Well then, intrepid listeners, this is all the time we have for today. I would like to thank my guest, Abby Higginson. Please look for future podcasts right here, same bat time, same bat channel. On the next podcast, oh, never mind. Just tune in and you'll figure it out, because we don't know who it is, and I wouldn't tell you anyway because I want you to be surprised. I guarantee you will be entertained and enlightened at the same time. I'm your host, Gary Weiss, CPA. I look forward to spending time with you. And remember the old Chinese proverb, when you drink the water, remember the man who dug the well.
Tax Matters Radio Podcast.
Presented by the Echelon Radio Network.
And Echelon Business Development.
More than just networking.
Way more.